Who grabs the fifth and final spot in the Royals rotation? We'll give you our pick next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson. You can give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can catch us very easily on wherever you get your podcast. That can be Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit that follow button and subscribe. If you're a first-time listener, of course, welcome in. We love new listeners here on the Locked On Royals channel. And if you want to know a little bit more about me, I'm based here in Kansas City. I work over at Sports Radio 810 WHB. Got a show once a week over there and stay very busy in the producing world. So if you ever want my thoughts on things that may not always pertain to Major League Baseball or the Royals, you can catch me over there on AM radio. But when you come to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. Well, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. It's the perfect episode to be brought to you by FanDuel because March Madness begins tomorrow. Those play-in games in Dayton, Ohio will have people betting all across the country. So why not you join in on the fun? Go and create your FanDuel account and use our code of Locked On so you can win some big-time money. But we'll have more on that coming up in about 10 to 15 minutes or so. Well, it's been a weird couple of weeks here on the Locked On Royals channel. Haven't been as consistent with putting out episodes Monday through Friday. We've had to stretch into the weekend. We've had days where we didn't have an episode at all, so we had to bump to 2 episodes in one day. It's been a little bit chaotic. But I think I got, for the most part, the connection situation handled in a good manner. I think that I've gotten everything ironed out. I've worked out those kinks a little bit, and I think that we won't be having any issues moving forward. So the plan is this week, Monday through Friday, you're going to get some Royals content, and it's the final week of spring training, where at this point, everybody is very aware of which guys are going to be in the lineup, which guys are going to be in the rotation, which guys are going to be in the bullpen, or at least you'd think that would be the case. And I thought for about 2 or 3 months that the Royals were not going to change their mind on who the fifth spot in the rotation was going to go to. This goes all the way back to December, I would say, when the Royals were bringing in new arms, when they were going through free agency, spending lots of money. It felt like the focus was on keeping the top half of the rotation a strong front. They really wanted to put a lot of their muscle, a lot of their meat to the front part of the rotation and be all right with who they had in the 4 and the 5 spot. So if you're understanding what I'm saying here, what I'm more so getting at is they went outside the organization to get that muscle. And this goes back to maybe even before December, because I have to throw in Cole Reagans here. Cole Reagans was acquired midseason last year. So the front spots in the rotation, they needed the muscle. They needed to spend money and go and get different guys for the top 3 spot. But those last 2 always felt like they were going to Brady Singer and Jordan Lyles. It never felt like J.J. Picollo or John Sherman were interested in bumping one of those guys out of the spots. Now, Brady Singer, I think, is in much better graces with the fans. That if I were to walk up to you, or if I were to walk up to you back in October, September, and I said, hey, Brady Singer is going to be the number 4 in that rotation next year. You taking that? I think a lot of people would have said yes. If I would have said Jordan Lyles is going to be back in this rotation, even as the number 5, a lot of people would have told me to go away and tell it to somebody else because they didn't want to hear it. And for a long time, I didn't want to hear it. Jordan Lyles, the season that he had, he was still going to be good enough to come back into this rotation. Well, I don't think the Royals saw it as, well, he was bad. We might as well just keep paying him to eat innings. And I still think that would be his role if he takes the number 5 spot in the rotation. But the Royals also feel like in the 5 spot compared to the 2 spot in the rotation like he was last year, the expectation comes way down. If you're number 2 guy, if Michael Wacha has a 6.15 ERA and leads the league in home runs allowed, we're going to have a serious problem. But if your number 5 starter doesn't pitch well for a while, well, you pivot to somebody else. And to that point, I have hammered in this idea of, well, you want to start with Lyles as the 5 because you can always pivot, right? If Lyles isn't good, you can turn to Lynch, you can turn to Marsh, you can turn to Serpa, whoever you wanted to go to. And my argument against that was if you put Marsh there or Lynch there and they struggle, well, who do you go to? Well, that was a little bit narrow-minded thinking on my part because at the end of the day, this is about who's the best fit, who's the best option. And spring training is spring training for a reason. It's for veterans to work on things, to build their arms back up, and it's for the young guys to try and earn spots. But I would be lying to all of you listening tonight if I said that after 13 games in spring training, I feel really comfortable about Jordan Lyles being the number 5. And it's not just because he gave up back-to-back home runs in his last outing against Chicago, which came on Sunday, I believe that was, or might have been Saturday. I think it was Saturday. It's that he's only had 2 starts. His arm's not that built up. And after he had this setback, he looked really bad in his second outing. All the meanwhile, Alec Marsh, who piggybacked off Jordan Lyles, pitched pretty well, in my opinion. Gave up 1 long home run to Seiya Suzuki, but he had 4 innings of 2-run ball, struck out 5, didn't walk anybody. You put those guys side by side, who's the best option? Who is the best option for the number 5 spot? I would like to say Daniel Lynch is in that hunt. I know a couple of my followers do think Daniel Lynch is going to be the number 5 guy, but I think Alec Marsh has pitched better. At this point, it's a lot more wide open than I really thought it would be. There have been a couple things that have proved me wrong this spring training. And I just think as I'm seeing Alec Marsh get more work, even Daniel Lynch get more work, I think the Royals are okay with the idea of one of those guys taking the number 5 spot and Lyles moving to long relief, which now that I say it out loud, that might be the best role. I mean, Jordan Lyles comes in blowouts, throws strikes, eat the rest of the innings. That seems like a better fit than him starting right off the bat, him being the 5th starter. Now, I do not believe the Royals need their 5th starter until, give or take, the 3rd series of the year. They can wait a little bit. No, they don't need to make a rash decision. But I look at the options here, and I just think you have an opportunity to make this rotation better with Alec Marsh in than with Jordan Lyles at the 5. Because even if Jordan Lyles pitches better, even if he bounces back, and something that I felt confident he would at least a little bit, how good is that really? I think Alec Marsh has the upside of being a very consistent and high strikeout number 5 guy in the rotation and somebody you can build around a little bit. Jordan Lyles is not somebody you build around a number 5 spot. I thought he'd be an okay option because he throws strikes. He can work deep into games. I know people don't want to hear that. Hell, I didn't want to hear it for a long time. But there were worse options, and that sounds crazy to say, but there were worse options out there when I really thought about it. If you have a guy that can't get past the 3rd or the 4th inning, it's not a valuable starter. Now, Jordan Lyles in his 6+ ERA, that's not valuable either. But I'm going by the point of how I thought he'd bounce back, look closer to what he was in Baltimore before he came over to Kansas City. That, to me, has some value. But that's also hoping and wishing and praying. And what we're seeing in spring training is a guy that's had a setback, dealing with a little bit of an injury, for lack of a better term. He seems better now, but he's got to build the arm back up. He's only had 2 starts. Alec Marsh has gotten in far more work. It might be the better option at this point to hand him the keys to the number 5 spot and you roll from there. If Marsh can't cut it, then all right, you could turn to Jordan Lyles to hop back in the rotation. Or you turn to Daniel Lynch. To me, though, it warrants a bigger conversation now. And I'm sure that Mac Quatrero and his coaching staff, they are talking through it at this point in time. Who is going to be the guy that takes that spot? Do you feel better? Do you feel like the upside's better with Marsh there? Would you rather play it safe and take a conservative approach? And Jordan Lyles is going to bounce back, and that might be valuable for a number 5 spot. Or it could come down to thinking Alec Marsh could be more effective out of the bullpen, and you don't want to burn him as a starter. I even got asked if the opener has been discussed. I don't think the opener is going to be an option right off the bat, but I could absolutely see it at some point this year, and Alec Marsh wouldn't be a bad opener. He also could be a much better starter than Jordan Lyles. To me, it's not so much about the numbers. It's the fact that Jordan Lyles has 2 starts in spring training. His arm isn't built up. At this point, I'd be a little bit more surprised if he does have the number 5 spot. I think Alec Marsh is my front runner, and I'm going to lock it in because this may be the last episode or segment we do about predicting the number 5 starter in the rotation. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show. When we come back, the American League Central favorite is getting more and more banged up. What does that mean for the Royals? We'll tell you next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the title sponsor today in FanDuel. Say goodbye to busted brackets because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of the NCAA tournament. Whether you're betting on a big upset or a 1 seed, it's time to go dancing on America's number 1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. That's $200 to use on point spreads, money lines, and you can even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. And last year, I had quite the winning streak when having some prop bets for a lot of the games in the NCAA tournament. And I'm glad FanDuel pointed out, you don't just have to worry about brackets being busted. If you have an upset pick and it doesn't work out, well, bet on that team in the next round. Bet on somebody else. Keep winning money, but do so over at FanDuel. And be sure to use our code of Locked On. So after this episode, go and create your FanDuel account today. Well, we got word, or at least social media got word, that the Minnesota Twins are dealing with quite the list of injuries heading into the regular season. Their lights-out closer, Johan Duran, is going to begin the season on the 15-day injured list. He's got an oblique problem. Caleb Thielbar, another one of their sure-handed bullpen guys, he will begin the season on the injured list with a hamstring problem. Then you had Byron Buxton, scratched from today's lineup. I think it was a game against Boston, with lower back tightness. And we know about all those injury concerns that Byron Buxton has. Now, the reason I wanted to dive into this is because I think it goes to show you that the American League Central is going to be a wide open race. Minnesota's problem is not talent. Minnesota's problem is not the lack of experience. It's none of that. It's health. If Minnesota can't stay healthy, they are not going to win this division. And that goes the same for every team in the Central. If Cleveland, if Detroit, the Royals, the White Sox run into injury problems, they're not going to win the division. But this is important to point out because the other teams in this division have talent problems in certain spots. They don't have the bullpen Minnesota has. They don't have the rotation Minnesota has. They don't have the power Minnesota has. So these Central teams that are looking up and chasing the Twins and will be chasing them to begin the year because they are the favorite, they're the reigning division champs, they deserve that respect. But that's how I've gone back, or that is what I've gone back to time and time again when asked about, will the Royals have a chance to compete for this division? Well, of course, a lot has to go right. A lot has to go in favor of Kansas City. But at the same time, a lot has to go wrong for other teams. And Minnesota is absolutely at the top of that list. The more injuries that pile up, the closer that talent gap gets. And right now, that first team that comes to Kauffman Stadium is going to be not a shell of itself, but a team that is nowhere near 100%. A team that already knows the injuries are hindering them. Now, we're not going to make rash decisions. We're not going to make snap judgments about a team that's not 100%. But injuries are tricky in baseball, right? We can always tell ourselves, well, they're banged up. We'll be 100% in June. We'll be 100% in July. There's no guarantee. Baseball, to me, has more lingering injuries than any other sport. You think it's something like an oblique injury. Now, Johan Duran is the centerpiece of that bullpen. You're trailing Minnesota and he enters the game, you're probably not winning. I know Bobby Witt Jr. had the walk-off grand slam off him last year, but over the course of the year, not many people were hitting Johan Duran. Caleb Thielbar was really effective as well. So you look at those two guys and think, okay, they're out of the bullpen for now. Somebody else has to step up for Minnesota. It's still a very good bullpen, but it's also a strength. It is such a strength for that team. Their rotation and bullpen are what make them the favorites. You start taking that away, guys start getting banged up, guys start getting injured. Well, the door opens. And I don't know how open that door really is. I don't know how long it stays open. These guys could heal up quickly and you look up in 3 or 4 weeks and there they are back in the bullpen. But I've always believed the thing getting in the way of Minnesota is not themselves. It's not their talent. It's not their strikeout problems offensively. It's health. If their guys can't stay healthy, somebody else in the Central is going to be healthy and take that spot from them. I know for a lot of Royals fans, you so desperately want it to be them, want it to be Kansas City. But a lot of other fan bases in this division are hoping the same for their team. This door just opened for Detroit. This door opened for Cleveland. This door opened for Kansas City. And even though it's a 15-day IL stint, a 10-day IL stint, it's not, just a straight line. It's not done for 15 days. They're back. They're fine. They can linger. And I don't root for injuries. I don't root for teams to be banged up. It's just the reality of baseball. Guys get hurt. But there are going to be Royals players and guys that are contributors that have injuries. It's a 162-game season. If you think they're getting through that with no problems, you would be mistaken. However, it's also a point in time as to which you're injured. Minnesota dealing with this many injuries before the season even begins, that's detrimental. It's detrimental, especially for their strongest part of their team. You take away the star, you're going to be hurting. You're going to have to turn to somebody else. This Minnesota team they see next week will not be 100%. I'm curious about how Byron Buxton heals from this, because he's somebody they have counted on time and time and time again to be the star, to be the guy. Now it's more so Royce Lewis, and I think he is going to be the star coming into Minnesota along with Pablo Lopez and Joe Ryan and Bailey Ober. But it's a tough spot to be dealing with injuries before you even have game one. And the guys that matter, I would like to say everybody on your 26-man roster matters, but losing your closer right off the bat, not for maybe a long time, who knows? Oblique injuries we've seen in baseball, those things linger. But for Minnesota, in the years that they have been the top team in the American League Central, you look at the down years, it's never been about talent. It's always been about durability. It's always been about injuries plaguing them. And the Central this offseason has played into the hands of the Royals a little bit. They've been active while everybody else kind of sat on their hands. Detroit was somewhat active, probably second most next to the Royals, but everybody else sat on their hands. Chicago decided to sell. Cleveland, as they seem to do every single year, they didn't spend. And Minnesota, they didn't really have a need to spend. They had a very talented and loaded group, but here's where it becomes a problem. The injuries, the bullpen, losing guys and key guys. I don't expect those guys to be out long, but it just goes to show you that the depth is going to be tested early on for a team like Minnesota. They've got a lot of talent, but to me, the only thing that gets in their way of another American League Central title is being hurt, being banged up, and right now they're already dealing with it. Okay, before we move on to our final segment, want to tell you about a really cool thing that we're doing on March 20th, which is coming up this Wednesday at 6 p.m. Central Time. You guys can be the first to get local insight from the MLB local experts, including myself of the Locked On Podcast Network, with our divisional previews. Again, find that on March 20th at 6 p.m. Central Time on Locked On Sports Today, the 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. When we return, Blake Wolters is really starting to raise eyebrows at the Royals camp. I already told you about it a couple weeks back, and we're going to talk about him again next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to give me a follow on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. Before we go any further, want to give a shout out to the other sponsor today in eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. It's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Well, Blake Wolters is turning heads once again. And I am going to reiterate something that I said a few weeks back from what I was told and surprised by multiple coaches and multiple scouts. And that's that Blake Wolters is that prospect, is that prize piece that has everybody going, wow, this kid can be something. And I think everybody knew about the fastball coming out of the draft when he did his little, showcase last year, when he had a couple of showcases and it was shown on MLB Network during the draft and the highlights of that. That's kind of more so what I'm getting at here. People were talking about the fastball. This is a great pick because he's got a big arm. 95, 96, 97. For an 18-year-old, it's wildly impressive. Then he gets to Kansas City, and he gets around all these coaches, all these scouts, and they just continue to rave about him. This is the guy we're going to be talking about. This is the prospect that'll be shooting up the top 100 boards. And then we see this tweet from Baseball America today that he's hitting triple digits in camp. 100 miles an hour for a kid that just turned 19 in October. Now, you think that velocity comes with time. You think that velocity will really be there once you mature. He's 19. Now, velocity is one thing, command's another. But he's also going to have time now to develop those next pitches. He hasn't even pitched yet in a full professional season, but this is what he's blessed with. This is the type of arsenal that he has. And I hate putting a ton of pressure on prospects. I really do hate it because in baseball, there's never such a thing as a sure thing. That's kind of the motto that I live by when looking at prospects. You can really like a guy. You can pick your guy. Javi Vaz is mine in the Royal system. But I can't tell you 100% he's going to be a big-time contributor. I can project it. I can make my predictions. But it's not a sure thing. It never is. Even when Bobby Witt Jr. was taken, everybody said, this can't-miss kid. And he did become an MVP candidate. And I'd imagine he'll win at least one in his career. But it's still not a sure thing because you don't know what an 18-year-old or a 19-year-old is thinking when they are blessed with this type of talent. And Blake Wolters is one of those guys. And feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but I believe I said something along the lines of a lot of people are going to judge last year's draft class on Blake Mitchell and his success. Whether he becomes a star or not, we're all going to dictate this class on that. But for a lot of us, we're going to look at some of the picks that were right after Blake Mitchell. And the two I'm looking at is Blake Wolters and Hero Wyatt. I think those are two guys that are going to shoot up top 100 boards as early as this year. I really think they could. Next year, I would probably bet money on it. I do not remember the last time the Royals had a pitching prospect this young look like this. Just the early signs. All right, the numbers are going to be a very big telling point. But I've had a lot of guys that I've liked in the Royals system. And maybe that says more about my optimism than anything because it's a bottom two farm system in baseball. But there's time for it to grow. And Blake Wolters feels like to me the guy that's going to be the talking point, the centerpiece. When you bring up this farm system, Blake Wolters is going to be at the top. I really do believe that. It's hard not to think that when you hear about a 19-year-old that can throw triple digits. Who knows where he's going to be when he's 22? And also for so many Royals pitching prospects, few have had an arsenal like this so early. You know, when the Royals were debuting some of these guys, these young pitching arms, they were still 24 and 25, some of them 23, and you felt like, wow, they're really young. They're really, really young. And they were. In the grand scheme of things, it's very young for a big league career. But if Blake Wolters gets off to a hot start numbers-wise, which is going to be hard for low-A guys to hit triple digits. If he can locate it somewhat well and have some good secondary offering, he's going to be really hard to hit. And you think about 2 years down the road where he could be. I mean, is he debuting it at 21? I mean, one of those really young, star-studded pitching prospects? Maybe he is, maybe he isn't. Right? And as I just said, I do not like putting that type of pressure on a prospect. And prospects are never a sure thing. They could hit 400 in AAA and come up and not do anything. I mean, if you want to talk about being bamboozled, being fooled, I mean, look at Jackson Coar's numbers in AAA before he was called up. You couldn't hit him. He was great. And he comes up and has some form of the yips in Anaheim for his major league debut and never puts it together. And may never be able to put it together. But wow, you talk about a prospect like this, a second rounder, I might add. This was not a 1-1 pick. This was not a top 5 pick in the draft. This was a second round guy. And wasn't throwing triple digits when he got to Kansas City. He was sitting about 95, 96 and topping out at 98. There's been a little bit of an increase in velocity. And we've seen that more and more with the Royals pitching department. I was asked this about one of the followers about, did I hear that right? That you said this new regime of the Royals pitching department, it's doing good things in the minor leagues. It is. It is. And a lot of people won't believe it until they actually see it. And I don't blame you one bit. But from what we've heard, things are getting a lot better. A lot better for guys at the lower level and becoming a better version of themselves. A more complete, a more mature version of themselves in ways that we did not see for a long time with the Royals developing pitchers. But man, it's hard not to be buying stock in Blake Wolters right now. I think maybe by the end of this year, he is the number one prospect in the Royals system. But you let us know if you've got somebody else in mind, if you buy into him, if you don't buy into him. We always appreciate comments on the YouTube page below. But as for today, that's going to do it for another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. Be sure to follow me on Twitter at JohnnyJ_15. Before we say goodbye, one last reminder. This Wednesday, March 20th at 6 p.m. Central Time, you can get the MLB season preview that's coming exclusively to Locked On Sports Today. That's right. On March 20th at 6 p.m. Central Time, be the first you'll get local insight from the MLB local experts, including myself, of the Locked On Podcast Network. Again, find it on March 20th at 6 p.m. Central Time. That's this Wednesday on the Locked On Sports Today 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Tomorrow, we're going to break down a little bit more about Seth Lugo's start against the Giants. It'll be taking place tomorrow night. A couple of the broadcasted games are going to be coming up. And maybe just continue to preview what this team may look like before opening day, which is now just 10 days away. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.